Politics in the U.S. is broken. The fundamental reason for this is that those drawn to pursue elected office are, almost without exception, narcissists of one variety or another. This is true everywhere in the world and would appear to be a human universal if it is permissible to speak of such things. But the U.S. political system seems to be especially good at selecting for the most deranged and narcissistic among the population. Perhaps this is due to the particular combination found in this country of highly concentrated wealth, a winner-take-all electoral system which is dominated by a political party duopoly, and a highly individualistic and materialistic culture. Whatever the case, at this point it must be clear to all but the most blinkered that American politics today is an absolute disaster, and the people in charge of running the country, regardless of which party they hail from, are inept, corrupt, and unfit to oversee a spelling bee, much less a nation. Unfortunately, the iron grip of the two major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, has served to cut off what would otherwise be the most obvious response to this problem. While the U.S. has a number of third parties, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Working Families Party, etc., these have fallen into one of two camps, neither of which has proven to be up to the challenge of making any real difference in electoral or policy outcomes. These parties are either, like the Working Families Party, simply another political formation that inevitably supports one or the other of the two dominant parties, thus subsuming themselves to whichever party they habitually endorse, or they fall prey to the spoiler problem, which has plagued all third-party efforts in the United States. The spoiler problem is this. If your party is to the left of center, they will draw votes mainly from the Democrats, which will not be enough to gain a victory for your third party, but will serve to make a Republican victory more likely. And the same is true for parties to the right of center. They will draw voters who would otherwise vote Republican, thus making a victory for the Democrats more likely without themselves having any real chance of winning. This not only makes it impossible for a traditional third party to gain meaningful traction in the United States, on an individual level, it also makes advocating for policies that are at odds with those of the dominant parties difficult, as partisans of either party are prone to see policy suggestions coming from outside their party of choice as being opposed to their party of choice. Added to this unholy alliance of narcissistic politicians and duopoly political parties is the final animating factor, the catalyst of a million bad ideas and bad policies: the lobbyists, political donors, and campaign funders, i.e., the rich motherfuckers who are ruining everything for the rest of us. It is their billions of dollars that put the whole machine in motion, that keeps the dull gears churning along year after year, election cycle after election cycle. They are the ones who pay the piper and who give plum jobs to the piper's family members and their think tanks and lobbying firms. So of course, they're also the ones who call the tune that the rest of us are expected to dance to. However, and fortunately for us, the way that democracy works in the US is not the only way that it can work. In fact, many of the problems that we now face were well understood and accounted for by our democratic forebears, the people who first coined the word democracy, the ancient Greeks. It is with them, I believe, that we will find an important piece of the puzzle for saving our own American system. That puzzle piece is called sortition, and it means random selection. In many ancient Greek city-states, this is how public offices were filled, apart from the military roles, which were elected. To the ancient Greeks, the use of sortition was a recognition of true equality among the citizenry, while elections were only used in situations where inequality among the people was presumed. Elections, therefore, were actually seen as undemocratic, since not everyone had an equal chance of being selected. An ancient Greek, therefore, would not recognize in contemporary America anything they would call a democracy. Whereas democracies in ancient Greece had randomly selected lawmakers and elected military leaders, we have elected lawmakers and appointed military leaders. No real democracy anywhere, except in jury duty, which is the only place in which sortition is actually used in the US government. We need a third option in this country that people can look to for real, honest-to-goodness democracy. Rule by the people, the citizens, not rule by the narcissists or rule by the wealthiest, as is now the case, but rule by the people and by the will of the people. So my proposal for a viable third party in the US is this: a third party where candidates for office are selected at random from among the members of the party. This is step 1 for making a political party without politicians. Step 2 is taking the responsibility for deciding how to vote on any particular bill out of the hands of the elected officials. This can be done with the use of an online voting tool, like Loomio, or something similar. By allowing the members of the party to directly vote their preference on any bill, and by requiring the party's elected officials to cast their votes in accordance with whatever the majority preference is, it would be possible to create a political party that not only has no place for politicians, but is downright repellent to them. Politicians, of course, are those who use or seek to use the powers of government to further their own ambitions for power, prestige, and wealth. A party that takes the power to decide votes in the representative assembly out of the hands of the elected officials who are charged with actually casting those votes is one in which politicians have lost all of their bargaining chips, and so one which they will avoid in the same way that vegans avoid Five Guys. There is simply nothing in it for them. As to the campaign funders, such a party would have no need for them. If it accomplished nothing else, the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign showed that it is completely possible to put together an impressive amount of funding exclusively from small donor donations. And of course, the typical big money campaign funders will be repelled from such a third party for the same reason that politicians will be. There will be no one for them to buy off with their mountains of money. Since representatives would be required to vote according to the will of the members, the only way to effect a vote would be to get on Loomio and make a convincing argument. And lastly, but not leastly, this type of party structure can avoid the spoiler syndrome by drawing voters in equal measure from all sides of the political spectrum. The party itself has no platform apart from democracy, so it can draw from both legacy parties equally, as well as appeal to the 40% of the population that do not identify with either party. The reality is that most people are a mishmash of political opinions that often do not fit tidily into either the liberal left or conservative right boxes. This party would actually allow people to express the full quirkiness of their political views and would give those views actual meaning. The main selling points of a political party like this are that if a representative doesn't vote the way you want them to, in this party there is actually something you can do to have an effect on that. Get a bunch of your friends to join the party and vote for the outcome you want next time. Unlike either of the two legacy political parties, political engagement would be encouraged and rewarded in a transparent way. I've been observing and participating in the US political scene for a couple of decades now, and what I have laid out above is not only what I personally would like to see and be part of, but also the only way I can conceive of a third party avoiding the spoiler problem. And no, I don't think trying to take over either one of the two legacy parties is a reasonable proposition. Both are closely held organizations with entrenched power structures. Sanders tried to come from outside the Democrats' existing power structure and was swatted down with ease. Trump claims to be assaulting the Republican power structure, but when he was president, he appointed the same people who have been in power in that party since the 1980s. Unless something drastic changes, we will continue the same dreary cycle that's been repeating as long as anyone can remember, of Democrat and Republican politicians handing off power between each other, each taking their turn at the helm of the ship of state, each steering it ever closer to the reefs of destruction. It should be apparent by now that the political leaders of both parties in this country are feckless, self-serving pricks. Given the design of our current political system, it's probably inevitable that it should have ended up this way. Regardless, When the options we are given are as poor as those perpetually on offer from the duopoly parties, we must either earnestly set out to find something better, or resign ourselves to being used and abused by a bunch of rich assholes. So let's do it. Let's start a political party where the members all get a say on how their representatives will vote. A party where serving in public office is a duty that any citizen may be called upon to fulfill. Not to force their own opinions on the rest of their peers, not to line their pockets with donor money, but to make sure the collective will of their peers is being reflected in the halls of power. It can start small, on the local level. It's easy and free to set up a Loomio group. If you can sell your neighbors on the idea that you should all have a democratic say on city business, you can form a local party, randomly select a candidate, and start running people for office. We have the technology. We have the ability to create the first American political party based on actual democracy. We can save the country from the depredations of its own political class, but we're going to need to get a move on it if we want to avoid what inevitably awaits if we remain on the path that we are on. Thank you for listening. This has been Metapolitics. Put a comment down below and tell me how wrong I am. We'll be back soon for more discussion of this and other metapolitical topics. So until then, take care of yourself, be kind to each other, and don't let the bastards get you down.